Hello and welcome to the Incite Insights, what your background check data could and should tell you conference call. My name is Raina and I will be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. The slides will advance automatically during this presentation. If the slides do not appear to be advancing as they should, or you experience audio degradation, please refresh your screen as it may be an issue with your connectivity. You may ask a question at any time in the Q&A box on the right side of your screen and hit submit. I will now turn the call over to Dan Kohlhofer, Chief Innovation Officer at First Advantage. Dan, you may begin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about how analytics can optimize your screening program. And throughout today's call, we'll be giving you best practices that you can take back to your team to make sure that you're getting the most out of your screening program and the reports that you're sharing with your organization. Joining me on the call will be Paul Rainey, who's one of our senior solution engineers, who's one of our main product experts, and we'll be going through a demonstration of how First Advantage is helping our customers better understand and optimize their screening programs. Now, to get started, this is the world we find ourselves in, right? There's tons of news and hype around a myriad of different analytics programs and architectures that organizations are trying to tackle, trying to navigate to figure out how they can give business the insight into how they're performing and what they need to change. These applications don't always work together, and you're asked to try to cobble a solution together out of these hundreds of companies, right? And this list is constantly changing through acquisition and new companies springing up. What we find through research is when companies try to take on the task of business intelligence themselves, over half the projects, 60% of the projects, ultimately end up in failure. And for the ones that actually do make it across the finish line, when you go survey business leaders, business users of those applications, and ask them, is it really helping you solve your problems? Is it really helping you run your business? Is it living up to those expectations? Almost 9 out of 10 of them don't feel like it's meeting the mark. So this is kind of the world we find ourselves in. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the crux of the issue is you all are being asked to put together these solutions, a comprehensive solution with multiple tool sets to load data, to transform data, to report on it, to share it, to cleanse it. All those different tasks typically need your IT teams to put these projects in place. And we all know how busy our IT organizations are. So not only do you have to keep mind share and tight scope definition throughout the project, but also what happens when things change? What happens when you acquire a new business unit? What happens when you make changes to your programs and those data feeds need to change? The reports you want need to change, right? This is not a static solution. And then one of the biggest things we hear from our customers is the lack of clarity in understanding requirements between business and the technology team. So business will ask for specific views into overall performance, and sometimes those requirements are misinterpreted or designed in such a way so that when business comes back with additional requests, that it requires massive change inside of the application. And then the final point to kind of keep this going here with all the different problems, final point is around a lot of times these solutions are designed for a specific business unit or a specific function. And what ends up happening then is those types of reports can't transcend to other different groups. They don't distribute well to other groups. There's not necessarily one system that everyone is looking at that's serving as one system of record, system of truth for the business. So this is the world you all find yourselves in. And these are points that we hear time and time again from our customers. When we start translating that into specific business requests and business challenges, a lot of the questions we'll hear from people are, what are those common background themes between the people that we hire and those that we don't, right? If you think about it, it sounds like a simple question, but really getting into the machine learning and cognitive analysis to really identify what are those common traits that we ultimately are hiring for. Does an Ivy League institution actually correlate with high hire rate, high retention, high performance within our company? Operational reports around why is screening taking so long? I think that's a question that many of the screening analysts that we talk with get from certain business units, certain business leaders, time and time again. Why is it taking so long to get my new hires approved? And these are all challenges that you're finding yourself having to answer. And how is your organization empowering you to answer these as quickly as possible? What is your spend producing this year compared to last? So can you report back to the organization easily to show how much you're spending for every criminal hit you're finding in each of your different role types in your organization? If you're in retail, how much does it cost to find a hit for a retail clerk, for a distribution center individual, for someone working at the headquarters? What are the different costs? What are the different risks that are being management reports? One of the things that we hear time and time again from our customers is we do this in Excel, right? 5 words I think many people dread hearing. We'll just do this in Excel. One of the big downfalls of Excel is its flexibility and its ability to really put together any type of report or statement that an organization wants. And one of the issues with that is, well, how do you load data into it? It's typically done in a one-off data load that requires either IT to expose the data, but then you and your business analyst, you might have a data analyst inside your team, have to go transform that data, have to cleanse it, have to come up with views to make sure that you're getting to the slice that you want. You also are trying to deal with security. So again, I've talked to numerous accounts where an individual will put a report together and they will copy that report 7, 8 different times for each of the different business units that they have to send it to. And then in each of those files, they have to delete 80% of the report to hide the other business unit's performance, to hide that data. Excel doesn't really lend itself well to organizational security and compliance, so it puts a massive amount of overhead on your team to try to maintain that, right? And it's really, you're asking one individual to go ahead and do that. So you're counting on business logic inside of a human to enact that compliance, as opposed to having a true enterprise-grade solution that automates and enforces that organizational security. And then the final piece around Excel is what happens at the end of the week, at the end of the month, right after you run your operations meeting, after everyone's reviewed the data and has come up with decisions, maybe new things to change. All the work that gone into assembling those Excel files, all the effort is basically useless at that point. It's obsolete. The report needs to be updated for the next time you run the ops meeting, for the next time you share this out with hiring managers, et cetera. So there's got to be a better way around doing this. And this is what we're going to be talking about, is what are those new essentials that you should be looking at in a reporting platform for analytics in HR and HR screening. Now, to kick things off, let's talk about some of the key KPIs and features that you want to be looking at. So kind of absolute table stakes are being able to report on all the essential metrics, things like what our volumes, our turnaround times, our costs, how does information compare to SLAs, being able to look at accurate adjudication information, being able to see how, as criminal hits are found, how do those roll up to different offense categories and offense types? Can you articulate what your adjudication strategy is as a company when it comes to drug use, when it comes to theft, when it comes to views on marijuana, right? Having good, clean, structured data and metrics is an absolute table stakes must-have in today's game. Where we're seeing customers also asking for and also delivering is when we start looking at industry benchmark information. So many customers have been requesting, we feel like we have a good program, but risk is entirely subjective, right? It's at the end of the day, there's nothing that says you've done 100% of checks. You could always potentially screen another county, another address, another zip code. You could always be running additional components. And one of the things our companies always are asking for is around confidence around their screening packages. And this is where industry benchmarking really comes in strong, is being able to give you a lens where you can see a true market representation for your industry on what kind of screening components are those companies running. What kind of look back time or depth, what we call depth. How far back are we looking in criminal history? Is the industry using education verification or prior employment verification for different types of packages? And it's essential that you have this because there's nothing stopping you from running more and more screens other than cost. So you want to balance the levers of cost, you want to balance the levers of time, velocity, turnaround time, and then you also want to deal with the amount of risk within your organization. So being able to look at industry information around velocity, around risk components, all help you have a stronger sense of confidence and allow you to communicate to others in your company effectively on we truly are running the right screening program for our company here. It's also important for you to be able to view all departments, all organizations, worldwide views, not running in siloed systems and kind of siloed reporting. So being able to have a holistic view of this, as well as be able to export, all in the best efforts to share, this information effectively and really talk about the value you're bringing to the company. And then where we see kind of the leading edge, leaders in different spaces using analytics is where you get into Six Sigma reporting, use of artificial intelligence, much more on the machine learning side, really using data-driven decisions to drive business strategy, right? And this is, we'll talk about some specific examples on how that's, how you really all should consider that. So first off, again, when we start talking about table stakes, you're going to talk to, every company you talk to will talk about different reports and dashboards that they can roll out to help you understand your screening programs. But I think what's really important for you to think about is, are the reports really being designed so that business can look at these reports and understand the business impact on screening? So for instance, the dashboard you're looking at here, this one is uncovering spend insights for an organization. And one of the things that we found through talking with numerous customers is they wanted very clear question and answer type representation on reports. You don't want to just show a bunch of data in pretty charts. You want to be able to clearly communicate what is the business impact, why should someone care about this given report visualization. So for instance, because this one is focused on spend, one of the reports that we hear requested so much from the finance team or from procurement within our customers is kind of net out what's the return, what's the cost, how are costs changing for us within our company. So in this case, it's talking about the spend for a given month, showing how it changed, showing the number of individuals that were screened, and it's also showing how what the cost per candidate is and how that's been changing. That's a really important number we hear from our customers because you may go through a seasonal employment surge and your screening volume may go up, your cost may go up. It's not necessarily that your costs are going up, it's the fact that you're bringing in a lot more people. So helping people understand and track average cost of candidate, understand the return on that, those are really important things. And having dashboards that allow you to clearly communicate that to senior executives, all while being interactive, allowing you to drill into them and kind of answer those follow-up what-if questions or why is that. So all of that is absolute table stakes that you should be getting, right? And looking for people and companies bringing that business-centric view into your dashboards. Now, when we talk about dashboards, we should also be focusing on this from from a visualization perspective, making sure you have a library of visuals that you can use and customize and configure yourself for best representation of the data. So for instance, so much of our business deals with geographies. When we're looking at where we're running screens, when we look at where we're placing individuals within our companies and understanding turnaround time, being able to come up with those associations, all of that just lends itself so well to visual representation on different types of maps. It's absolutely essential if you have good location-driven components to visualize and communicate business performance and screen time performance with maps. So again, it sounds like a small thing, but it's absolutely essential for you to be able to factor in. And as you're navigating this data here, please keep in mind that you'll be able to report on information on as wide information as appropriate for your role within the company. And as you're looking at this information, we also have built-in security to make sure you can't see data that you shouldn't see. So for instance, this is one particular view of some results around criminal events. And one of the things that we want to communicate is, the first name and last name have been obfuscated from the results here. So it's stored in the database, but it's hidden from me because as a report viewer, as a data analyst with access to Incite Advantage, I don't necessarily need to see the first name or last name about a given event. That said, there's a link there that if I were to click that link, it would take me to the raw data, right? All the comments on why we adjudicated someone ultimately to eligible or ineligible. But in the process of clicking that link, it's going to go check organizational security and say, does Dan really have access to view this information, right? So the great thing about this for your company is you're enforcing your organizational security, your compliance standards within code, right? Within computerized business logic, as opposed to that one data analyst who you're trusting, who can see everything, and even with good intentions may ultimately share some information that shouldn't get out around individuals' names, other PII, that could be shared in an Excel file, right? That's one of the biggest requests or issues that we hear from customers is they're just really concerned, or IT starts cracking down, compliance starts cracking down on how they're disseminating information through the org with Excel. So again, absolute table stakes that you have good organizational security around sharing of information. Now this is one that I get really excited about because I feel like we're really starting to go from just servicing a operational need of a customer in running the screen to really helping you better understand the industry and make more informed decisions within your company through industry benchmarking data. This is where companies start to distinguish themselves on, do they have a sizable customer set where if they were to report on your peers, they wouldn't just be reporting on one other customer, right? Also, if you look at this raw, anonymized, and aggregated data, is it presented in a way that I can easily compare how our business is performing, how the decisions or strategy we're enforcing, and how it compares to our peers? Are they exposing that to me? And I think this is one of the things, again, I'm really excited about because we can help expose for given customers. We can help them answer questions. Geez, it seems like this one region is running long all of a sudden. Did something change? Is it us, or is it the court system in that county, right? And again, with the industry data, you're able to see if that is something that, if there's a difference between your performance and the industry, right? I think that's really important for you because it starts to give you more confidence in the decisions you're making. It allows you to communicate more effectively within your organization and really start to distinguish yourself as a thought leader on HR services and HR strategy. Another example of this is looking at not just the operational view that we just took a look at, but also coming at it from a screening package and screening component perspective. It might be a little hard to see the text on the bottom portion of the screen in the PowerPoint view, but basically what you're seeing here are some of the different types of criminal packages that customers can choose to run, and they range in kind of thoroughness and level of scrutiny associated with them. And what this is showing, the blue bars would represent our company, and the pink or salmon colored bars would represent how the industry picks different types of packages, right? So what you're starting to see here is, as you go through this, are we picking the same package, or we're running more people through a less scrutinous, less thorough component for background screening? We can visualize this, and frankly, this is one of those charts that our customers are able to use as they communicate with their senior executives on the return and the value and the comparison of how they're positioned with their peers. Those are some of the charts that really help them, really make informed decisions and have power behind their statements of saying, we need to run a more thorough screening package. We need to make a change, right? Whether it's increasing our costs or even maybe running less screening components in some cases, but we want to make informed decisions not just on our data, but also being able to use industry data. And I think that's a really powerful thing for businesses to have access to. Okay. And I mentioned this before, but everything I've talked about really needs to be designed and rolled out in a system that allows all your peers, right, all the different business units, all the different geographies to make those same kind of decisions, to have that same kind of analytics and insight at their fingertips. And again, I think this is one of those areas of distinction that you start to see when you really dig into screening programs and analytics around screening programs. Am I truly using one system for this, or am I logging into different systems? Am I only able to get APAC or EMEA data in this one system? Am I only getting US data in this other system? Right, that's something you really need to think about as well. Again, this is, I think, something we've worked really diligently on, is not only being able to allow you to have that holistic view with different business units or different geographies, but really where I see this going is making it easy for our customers to get a holistic view of the employee. Right, so if you look on the bottom portion of the screen here, you'll see the 4 boxes on the end are kind of what people think of as screening, background screening data, where you have your background screen, your criminal screening information, you have verifications, you could have DOT information in there, employment, education, you have your drug testing, you have driver for DOT data. But being able to extend that data with additional information from the applicant tracking system. So being able to merge this, let's say, with what recruiter sourced this candidate, what recruiting campaign did we run that ultimately sourced this candidate, right? And be able to bring that in with all the background screening information, be able to pull in HRMS data so I can understand when people are onboarded, when they leave, and if they left voluntarily or if it was involuntary termination. I could bring in performance data into the system. And now what ends up happening is you get a completely different view that goes above and beyond just those operational reports around how is my screening business performing, to now really garnering insights into what characteristics on an individual's resume correlate with, or in their background screening report, correlate with someone being retained over 90 days or 365 days, right? What attributes correlate with our top performers or our second quartile or third quartile group of employees after 1 year or 2 years, right? And I think this is where those leading screening companies are going to be going to really help you leverage the data that comes back from a background report and use that in an augmented view of your employees to really make more informed decisions around your hiring strategy. So case in point. So one of our customers said, we have a hypothesis that individuals that have long commutes are not going to want to work here after a certain amount of time. And we worked with them and found in specific geographies that if individuals lived over like 4.2, 4.3 miles from the place of work, that they had an inflection point in retention after 90 days. Okay, this is in retail, but they saw that if individuals live more than 4.2 miles from the store, there was an inflection point. And they used that data to tell their recruiting staff, hey, as you're looking for individuals in these metro areas, really focus in on hyper-localized recruiting, right? Recommend, to store managers, if you have someone who's going to be coming in from a long drive, recommend that they work at, to another store. And we'll put programs in place to adjust retention reports and referrals and things like that. But let's look at that, right? And this is where, again, I start to get really excited, is because things like AI can lend itself, as you start to understand the value you can get from these types of reports. Customers, you all are much more willing to provide additional information about your employee population to help us close the loop for you and provide these types of insights, right? So again, I think this is somewhere some companies have been able to kind of, accomplish this through effort on their side and with their data science team. But I think when you look at where the screening industry is going, I think you need to be talking to your screening partners and saying, are you able to provide these types of capabilities to help us better understand our employee population, what we should be screening for, who we should be recruiting, and where we should be sourcing. Okay. And then kind of the last point I want to talk on for this portion of the presentation is when we start talking about reporting. So, again, we look at some of the dashboards, and Paul's going to do a great job walking you through some reports and showing you how First Advantage is helping customers address these points. But ultimately, you need to be able to share this information with others. So making it super easy for you if you want to export this as a PDF or PowerPoint, right? Understand that kind of the business logic goes away at that point, but we make it easy for you if you're assembling presentations for senior executives, want to take snapshots of this, annotate it. Super easy for you to communicate this and ultimately convey the value you and your team, your organization is providing to the rest of your company here. Okay. So we're going to come to questions after the demonstration. At this point, I'm going to switch it back over to Paul. Paul, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If you want to.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I'm excited to be able to show everybody how we can help our clients, or how we have helped our clients with this type of information and analytics. So let me just get that switched over real quickly. Okay. So as I'm showing now, this is, and you probably saw a little of this if you were, as Dan was going through his presentation, you probably noticed the look and the feel of how we help to present the data and the analytics for our clients. So this is within our Incite Advantage analytics tool. And if you think about data and analytics, it's the simplest version of data is just to get things like counts, right? So we've got total volumes. We've got the total volumes for this particular demo client and the average turnaround times. But then we take even those sort of just report listing types of information and make sure it's easy to break down by the different types of processes or experiences. So while it's great to know the overall average turnaround time for your program, if candidates are experiencing the process differently because there's different platforms or things of that nature, it's very important to be able to break that information out. So this dashboard is very program driven. It's interactive. So if there are things that are not utilized for a particular program, they just disappear. So the types of experiences. So if I look here on the right-hand side, where this becomes very valuable is there's more than one candidate experience for this particular client. And by tracking the statistics separately, they are able to tell that when they move to an older platform to a new state-of-the-art platform, they were able to drop their average turnaround time, by about 3/4 of a day, from 1.99 to 1.24. So an amazing win for them, but without being able to break it out, they would not know that. You'll see there's a lot of data here. So as we go across, you'll see I've got data going all the way back to June of 2017. So what we do is we present a 2-year detail of information, because sometimes you really need to delve back into your history to find out where you are now or how you've gotten here now. But there are other times that's just too much data. Really, you're just interested in, perhaps you're working on your reports for last year, so you would want to maybe just narrow it down to starting in January of last year. So if you'll notice, it's very interactive. If I were to click on just a single month, it will change my numbers, changes that all throughout the system. I could, if I were just momentarily doing it, X this out. Otherwise, I could agree to it, or I can do multiples. So I am going to look at this for the rest of these screens as if I want to look at my 2018 year in review. So again, very, very interactive, and allows that data to move. You determine how much or how little data you would like to be reviewing. Now, as I move forward, or before I move, it's also important to know how often is your data updated. You want very current, fresh data. So we update the data every evening, overnight, so all of the cases, orders that close out, that data automatically is there as you come in and refresh. So that way you know you always have current data. So it's very robust. As we move forward, and you'll see, so that first one was kind of counts, right? So you're kind of used to that in a standard kind of reporting. And then there are other things, though, like your average turnaround time. So we pull that right up to the front. So we have a 1.4 business days for last year for this particular client. But then we also look at the 90th percentile. We like to really talk about 90th percentiles because that's the cases where you start to see, some questions coming from the field and your other members of your team. So we are very focused on showing all of that. But sometimes, rather than look at the entire program, as I'm looking at the entire program, sometimes you really need to drill down and just look at particular subsets. So you want to make sure you have a way to have very robust filters or retrieval criteria. So we make everything available. So some are here across the top. These are very quick sort of filters. If I wanted to look at particular sources of information, or if I wanted to look at just, say, my records, which would be things that come from courthouses, for example, versus verification. So verifications would be where we're reaching out to verify information. Think of that as like employment and education verifications. And so you have the ability at any time to narrow down, but you can only select those that you actually have data for. So you'll see here at the bottom where I have healthcare grayed out. That's because for this particular client for that year, they didn't have any healthcare. So somewhere outside of that 1 year period, they did. So if they took off the time parameters, they would then be able to find out where those were. So those are some quick ways to do it. But the reality is there's all sorts of information that you need to be able to filter down to. So we have built in a filter page that provides you the ability to pre-select information that you want to base your reports on. So that can be those same ones that we just looked at before, but other things as well. If you're running multiple accounts and maybe under client IDs, if you're doing some compliance work, perhaps your legal team or you are the legal team, and you need to find information specific to a certain city or county. Maybe you need to respond to some sort of an audit or prep for an audit. You want to be able to filter based on subject geography. The subject is the person. So if you're looking to try to figure out, all right, I need to prepare reports for individuals that we screened that resided in San Francisco, for example. So you would break that down to San Francisco. But perhaps your request is a little different than that. Rather than be people that live in San Francisco, you need to know anyone who had a background or a portion of their background that hit in San Francisco. So maybe they previously lived there. So also you would want to be able to search by where the actual information came from. And then again, there's a lot of these. We won't go through all of these today, but just realize you need to make sure that your program is set up so that the data that you need to make meaningful, useful information from it has a way to be captured. So if those are things like creating fields where maybe you transmit client-defined fields, those would be things like maybe you're transmitting with the order things like cost center numbers, things of that nature, cost center numbers, location codes if you have those, anything that would be useful for you to come back and sort that information. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. So now when I go back, so as I go through this, at any point, as Dan had mentioned, if you see data that you want, you can certainly always export it out of the system. But you can always, let's say you saw something on this page that you liked and you want to use it somewhere else. You can take a snapshot. So I'm just going to take a snapshot here, and then you can provide a name to that snapshot so that you can then utilize it and create your own meaningful pages of information. So I'll show you a little bit about that in just a second. So rather than go through here and just individually look at each page, let's talk about how you can actually take the data, and we'll look at that in a little more in depth in a moment. But let's look at how you can go ahead and prepare it in a way so that it will be easy for you to share with your team or your board, or wherever you're needing to present that information. So you can also create what we call stories. And think of a story as your presentation. So you can create a new story. You give it a name. We'll just call it the quarterly meeting. You can select an icon just so that you'll know what the information was. And then you have the ability come up, and then you can add any of the pages of information that are within Incite Advantage. So rather than having to go through and present in front of individuals or print out your reports where you're picking one by one and then you're moving forward, on the front end, you would just save that information. So I'm going to add my service turnaround. I want to maybe add some order summary information. And just so I can make it look really special and pretty on the front end, I can add a title to the front of this presentation. I could, here's my title. Create your own title. You could, from those snapshots that I've pointed out earlier that you can take, you could come in and find one of those snapshots, insert it. So very nice. That way it's available to be there so that you have pre-created those. Now, I already created a story that I'm going to bring up, and then we'll go into the data a little more. So I just named it Insights after today's call. And I just hit this green start button in the top left to play my story. Okay, so then as I move forward, this first one is the service turnaround time that we had already looked at before. So let's say you're having your meeting or your presentation, or you just need to hand a hard copy of it, and you're asked for a copy of a particular slide or all of the slides. You can actually export this story. So you could export it to a PowerPoint, or a PDF. So really powerful there. That way you can be showing it and then provide that data or report or PowerPoint to your team. Okay, so we move forward. We already looked at that summary page. So let's look at the spend. And Dan had mentioned the spend earlier as well. So what's really great is based on my retrieval specs, and by the way, it saves those retrieval specs, or you can always come in and change them. So I have the ability to hit my go back into the data filters as I've shown before, so I could update that, so I could change anything on the fly there. And so it's going to bring up and show you your screening costs, what they ran for that time period, how many candidates were there, and it's a very interactive process. So again, even though you've created this, you're presenting it in your boardroom, you can still interactively change the information as you go forward. So if anyone asks you a question to drill down, you have that ability immediately. Okay, then as soon as I take off that filter, it moves back. All right, so one of the pages that were built in that our clients really like is just an overview of the insights of their program, just so that it quickly pulls out what the volume was for that particular period, turnaround times, and here's a good example of benchmarking. So it's taking the turnaround time for my program, I'm showing it there at the 90th percentile, and it's benchmarking that, showing me what it is compared to the rest of the retail industry. And so it also shows you the delta. So in this case, I'm able to see, all right, compared to the other companies that did similar programs, I'm actually running a bit quicker than them. Quickly pulls out your highest volume orders or packages, which ones have the slowest turnaround times, which of your requesters or reps have the most missing information, things like unable to verify. So I just picked something through a large number here to give you an example of that. Okay. As I continue to move forward, the turnaround time, as we mentioned before, crucial here. I'm going to look at my time service, my average, and my go forward. But as I look at these other graphs, some of them are interactive as well. So right now we're showing 90th percentile on this bar graph on the left. If I click it, I can just change that to a 50th percentile. So again, on the fly, I can change the information that I am presenting to make it the most effective use of your data that you can. So we already talked about those turnaround times. All right, so let's do a package analysis real quick. So this is a great way to get a quick snapshot of your program, to drill down to where you have issues with unable to verify. That's where individuals are providing schools or prior employment, that there's some issues with getting it to confirm. So what our clients have used that for, some have used that to discover, oh, you know what, we've hired a lot of temp to perm individuals, and what we found was they were giving us the company they were placed with, or rather than temp to perms, they were placed in temporary positions, and they were listing the name of the company they were assigned to, not to their actual employer. So we were able to use that information to then go back and make some tweaks to their process to make sure their candidates knew to give the actual name. Same for missing information. It's a great way to drill down. So at any point, I could just select my February missing information here. If I were to save that, I actually could go all the way through it. I'm just going to skip ahead real quick. I could go all the way down to, trying to find, you can actually extract that information. So I want to show what Dan was talking about previously. And I apologize, I think I must have left that in out when I created this, so I apologize. I'll show it to you in just a second. All right, another useful tool, and this just goes back to the compliance and audit features. So it's very important to know what you have been doing with the orders or the cases as they complete. So the case comes in, there's some derogatory information there. So the question then becomes, what did you do with that? Did you hire these individuals? Did you opt not to hire these individuals? So as I come in and look at this, you can see your total orders that had something on them that this client needed to review. And so you can see the ones where they made decisions, like here in the middle, decisional to ineligible. See that 7.7% of those, they went ahead and made a decision not to hire that individual. But they also had quite a large percentage where they decided they did hire them. And so that is a way to drill down. So if I wanted to look further into that to make sure we were not hiring individuals that violated a company policy, I could begin by selecting just those that were decisional and then change to eligible. And that would allow me, as I move forward, to have just the information on those cases. Okay, so move forward. Here is one of those maps, as Dan was mentioning. So there are multiples of those that are available. This particular one is looking for volumes based on the subject. So it's a great way for you to kind of look and tell where you're actually recruiting from. So, you know, if your office is in Texas, but you have this large amount of volume coming out of Ohio, you could drill down to figure out where that's coming from, trace it back to who the requesters were, who the recruiters were. You may find that you have really good schools in Ohio that you're recruiting from. Okay, this one, another great example of using the mapping technology. This is specific to my program. So it's looking at my location. So I've transmitted in my orders that these are where my locations are. So it could be based off of cost centers, things of that nature. And then you're able to zone in on what was my order volumes for those areas. So for example, here in Plano, Texas, I can quickly see that I had a little over 11,000 orders, and that the total amount of money that I spent for those screens were $333,000. So again, just a great way to use the mapping technologies. As we continue to move forward, so here's that background order detail. As I was attempting to show you just a second ago, I do apologize, I put that in a slightly different place. So anywhere, once you've narrowed down your data, if you want to come in and get the specifics, this is where you would be able to do that. So it's bringing up each of those individual candidates. And as Dan had stated, it's going to be based on your user rights as to how much information you should be able to have. So if you needed the information and had the correct user, it would go all the way to having the candidate name. One of the nice features is you could then export this in Excel if you really did need an Excel spreadsheet, or if you wanted to follow all the way through, if you were doing some auditing, you could actually go through the URL as long as you had the security rights and actually see the full report. So again, multiple ways to use that data. How do you get back to the actual source of it? How do you compare it? So here are, again, some of those industry metrics or benchmarking that we had mentioned. It's essential to have that ability. So in this case, it's comparing the individuals that I have deemed to be eligible versus decisional or ineligible. So in my case, for my company, I have done 85% of my candidates I have been deeming to be eligible. This particular one is benchmarking against the retail industry. And I can say, okay, I'm accepting about 11% more of the candidates than the other retailers. That could be good or bad. It gives you an idea of how you're comparing. Same for my decisionals. So you'll see I have more decisionals than the industry as a whole because there's only 2.1, but yet I'm accepting more. So where that type of information can be useful is to then look at that and then, again, continue to drill down and figure out why we made those decisions. But perhaps you need to make adjustments to your adjudication matrices or how you're making those decisions to make it easier to process and get your individuals through the system. So if you're always approving certain types of, say, misdemeanor theft charges over a couple of years, perhaps you change your scoring matrix so that it speeds up your time to hire and requires less manual research for you. And again, the same for the ineligibles. Okay, so again, for those adjudication matrix benchmarks, you can see just very quickly my company in the blue versus the industry. We do have multiple industries, so it's whichever industry makes sense for your company. Now, here is where we're really getting down into the nitty-gritty. So you're wanting to look at your criminal records indicators, have about an 8% hit rate, or 8% of the candidates had criminal activity. But then you want to drill down into that. So it's great to know the totals, but perhaps you want to look into that. So substance abuse. What does that mean for my substance abuses? So if I change that through the system, it will then allow me to really just drill down to those individuals. So once I drill into my substance abuse ones, I can really see what that is. So I've got some marijuana possessions and some DUIs are my two largest categories. So again, it goes back to, if that is important to you, certainly important that you continue to screen those individuals out. But if you're finding that that's not as important for certain positions, it's a good way to look at that to, again, see if you want to change the matrices that you use to determine who needs to be manually reviewed. Okay. Criminal breadth. Again, good way to compare how you're doing your searches compared to others in your industry. So the level of crime. So in this case, I look at the second column. I'm doing federal criminals a very large percentage of the time, but what I'm seeing is the other retailers are not doing it that often. So again, it's just a way to compare to industries, not to say what you're currently doing is wrong. It's just so that you know compared to the others. So it could be that you have a particular need to do federal criminals. Maybe you have some federal contracts. Maybe you have positions that have some sort of security transactions, et cetera. So maybe those make sense. So just because you're being more conservative in doing a scope that others in your industry are not, doesn't mean it's wrong. It just gives you a good comparison there. We certainly don't want to omit drug testing. Drug testing is a very important part of your programs for those of you that do drug testing. So again, just snapshots to very quickly be able to determine, how many tests you've done, what your spend is on those, what additional services, and then your breakdown. How do you compare against others in your industry? What are your testing methodologies on the top here? I'm doing a lot of urine instant, some DOT, some full service, and then comparing that to my industry peers, as well as my trends. And then I know we're getting close on time. So again, just want to say, and then we could break that down as well. See your types of testing. So if you're curious about doing random testing, for example, you could see if you were at 0, or here I'm doing a good quantity of those. So I can easily compare and see that, I'm doing a little less random than retail in general, but overall retail is doing primarily pre-employment. So with that, as we're coming up on time, Dan, I'm going to turn it back over to you. So thank you for letting me show what the actual system looks like.
All right, great. Thank you, Paul. Let me
So Dan, this is Shari Hubbard. I'm just going to jump in and remind everyone, if you have any questions, we have a few minutes left that we could answer those. We've had a few turned in, but please go ahead and go to your question and answer area and submit any questions in writing, and we'll try to get to those. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in with some questions while you're getting that loaded back up. So the first question that we had in is that you showed retail. What other industries are available for benchmark comparison?
Great question. So we have several different industries. We include financial services, transportation. Paul, can you help me out here? Just rattle off the industries.
Sure. So we have financial services, we have healthcare, we have pharmaceutical separated out from healthcare, we have technology, we have both retail and technology retailers, so quite a number of those, business services. So what we do is we match you with what you feel is your industry peer.
Great, thank you. Is the data available for global locations?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And the next one is, you had mentioned customer audits. What do customers usually audit?
Another good question. So one of the main uses I've seen for that is when you look at adjudication and you drill into your adjudication and you say for an individual with a violent crime offense type, and you see that some of these were adjudicated to eligible, the visualizations make it really easy for a compliance or an audit team to go find particular cases that were adjudicated one way or the other, and then be able to launch into those particular cases. So they can use this to kind of take literally from thousands of screens, go to the one or two cases that they want to test for, and make sure that the adjudication comments in the order in the case map to corporate standards.
Great.
That's one particular example.
All right. The next question is that you had shown a 90th percentile. Is that for the company, for their industry, or for all companies that are in the database?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me just summarize. When we say 90th percentile, because there's some folks on the webinar that are not First Advantage customers, and First Advantage used the term 90th percentile quite a bit. So 90th percentile simply means for a given metric, whether it's total turnaround time, how long it takes for a candidate to complete the data entry, whether it's time for us to perform verification. 90th percentile simply means out of 100 cases, how long does it take for us or for 90 of the cases to get to that point? We've found that that's a very representative number or particular metric for a given task, as opposed to looking at the mean, which is how long does it take for 50 to complete that, right, on average. And there's quite a bit of a difference in that. So you can absolutely report on either the statistical mean, median, or a 90th percentile. And what businesses tends to correlate with health of a given metric tends to be more correlated with a 90th percentile metric and how that trends over time, as opposed to looking at your average time, right? The average time may simply always be, 0.6 days in retail, but your 90th percentile may be a little bit more than that, right? And that might be what's changing as the long tail pushes out. So we tend to use 90th percentile. Does that answer the question, Shari?
Yes, thank you. This will be the final question, because we'll turn it back to you, Dan, to wrap up after this. I think this is for Paul. When you were clicking on the cities and to see the order volume spend, the question is that location based on candidate address, client address, or court searched? Do you know?
Paul, if I can take that.
Certainly, Dan.
Yeah, so that's, again, really you can report on any of those attributes. So if you want the map to be based on court searched and see where you're running searches, so if you have all your locations are in the state of Texas, but you can actually see how pervasive was your employee population with your screenings. You can view that based on where you're running the screens, or you can do it based on where your employees live. Yeah.
Great. And we'll turn the time back over to you, Dan.
Perfect. So just in closing, I put together a quick list here of, I'm hoping like you all can if you're looking for things you can take back to your team as you discuss, what came out of this 1-hour webinar here, I just want to make sure we can kind of clarify what are those must-haves that you should be looking at with a magnifying lens at your own screening analytics programs, right? And making sure that you can get access to clear productized dashboards that you can use to communicate to other business users without having to explain joins and how the data came about. Really think about how you could be joining your screening data with other parts of your business data around HR for employee hierarchies, termination dates, involuntary or voluntary termination information, ATS to look at recruiting campaigns and particular recruiters, which ones are sourcing candidates that have higher incident rates of criminal history, looking at that to really make sure you're running a good program, and then even performance management data, right? Ultimately being able to say, are there characteristics that we see on a screening report that correlate with overall performance in a job, right? And using that to make better decisions. Library visualizations is a absolute table stakes must-have for you, and make sure that you have a system that can look at all the different products, all different regions, all different business units within one common view. The benchmarking, again, that's where you start to really think about, wow, I could make a lot better decisions if I knew how our competitors were reacting, and say, is this something we want to differentiate on, or do we want to make sure we have at least same minimal risk exposure as them? And then ensuring security controls, getting rid of the Excel so that you have business logic and organizational security controls in place so that people aren't seeing PII information that they don't need to for their given role. With that, we're going to wrap things up. Raina, I'm going to turn it back over to you if you could close us out and talk about the survey, please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, a survey will appear on your screen. We appreciate your participation and feedback. This concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.